I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susie.
And today we have Eenie for our last episode of season 2. So,
whoop, whoop, whoop.
Woohoo! Yes, a little bit of a shorter season this time. Now that we
still figuring out the
logistics
of it all.
Yes, but we figured we started the whole podcast with Eenie, so why not end this season with Eenie again? And so basically, we're going to be talking haunted news stations. I don't think we've talked about
this
that
just
before.
In.
Yes, exactly. But before we dive into that, Eenie, would you like to introduce yourself for those who might not be familiar with you?
Yes. I am Enocha Edenfield, Eenie to my friends and sometimes enemies. I live in Savannah, Georgia. I've lived here since 2010. I used to work in news. I was a news producer at WSAV for a really long time. And then I left there in 2020, ended up starting my own Ghost and History Tour company. And yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you're not following Eenie on all social medias, do so.
Yes.
Because the content is top notch. It's great stuff. And she really knows Savannah, not just ghosts, but she really does put forth a really wonderful picture of Savannah. And it's like a tourist destination dream to have Eenie say something nice about your
absolutely
location.
Yes. Enie's kind of like the Savannah influencer, if you will.
Absolutely.
It wasn't an E-Shaver's bookshop that designed a window display after you were. Yeah.
I inspired a window display
at a bookstore. So there you go. But yeah, her handle is Salt Waves and Spanish Moss on TikTok and all the things. So definitely follow her because she doesn't just post about the ghost stuff. She definitely does. But if you want to know what's happening in Savannah that weekend or, fun things to do or, cool free things to do around Savannah. I know you talked about how City Hall does free tours and stuff. Yeah. I had no idea about that.
We actually did the City Hall tour after seeing that on TikTok. It was like, let's book that.
Right.
Let's do that. So yeah.
There you go. She's a wealth of knowledge. So definitely check her out. But before we do start talking about the hauntings of various news stations and whatnot in Savannah, we do have some new parajunkies to thank. So we want to thank Ann Ellis, Natalie N., Tessa Reber, Jessica Schroyer, Katie Glotz, I hope I said that correctly, and Elizabeth Elliott. Thank you guys so much for joining us over on the Patreon side of things and wanting to talk more ghosts with us. We love it. So if you want to become a parajunkie, you can definitely find us over on Patreon. We have lots of fun. We have exclusive episodes. We have a secret merch shop for just our parajunkies, all the things. It's fun. But let's go ahead and talk about news stations.
Yeah.
Woohoo. So, I am not super familiar with the ghosts of WSAV and all the things. So
yeah, well, I mean, it's not something you think about, like a broadcast news station being haunted, but it makes sense.
Oh, absolutely.
Because similar to a theater or a railroad station or a hotel, you've got a lot of people coming in and out, constant flow of energy. So yeah, it's going to leave stuff behind.
Not to mention broadcast towers.
Right.
Those
Yeah.
towers that are just pouring out energy, that are spreading information far and wide. And a lot of people encounter ghosts through TVs and other mediums. As a matter of fact, early spirit boxes were just TVs that they turned to the stations that didn't receive anything because it's all of this interaction energy-wise. So yeah, absolutely.
So we'll start with WTOC, which is the CBS affiliate here in town. And they actually started off as a radio station in 1929, I think. They ended up moving into an old Victorian home. And they were there for several decades. In the 1950s is when they decided to also become a broadcast news station, a television station as well. So they still had the radio, but they also had TV news. And they were there until 1995, and then that's when they built the location off of Chatham Parkway that they're in today. A few years ago, they did their big anniversary special. They're going back and they're talking to a lot of people who used to work there back when they were in that original location. And they were talking to an anchor who mentioned a ghost that haunted that place, the Colonel. And he talked about how when he arrived, nobody knew who the Colonel was. They just knew that the Colonel haunted this place. And he would give people crap. This particular anchor mentioned that there was a receptionist who started there and quit the exact same day because she had some kind of run-in with the Colonel, and she was like, y'all aren't paying me enough to deal with new stuff and a ghost. No, I'm out. A guy that I actually used to work with at WSAV used to work for the radio side of WTOC, and he told me that he would hear a man's voice in that part of the station at night when he knew there was no one else there. But he also had no idea who the Colonel was. Do you know?
I have stories,
okay.
yes.
Yeah. Because you're giving me that look, I was like,
yeah.
Chris knows. I actually tried to research who the Colonel was and kept running into dead ends. I was researching a completely different story and came across a mention of the Lawton Mansion. The Lawtons are a very old Savannah family. Mm-hmm. And I decided just to look into it. Where's the Lawton Mansion? And it led me back to the old WTOC. And it was purchased by a man named Colonel Alexander Lawton. Not to be confused with his father, who was General Alexander Lawton.
Right.
Two different guys. But he was a colonel in the United States Army, fought during the Spanish-American War. He was a lawyer. A lot of Lawtons are lawyers, which when your last name is Lawton, you gotta.
Yeah, absolutely.
He was also a vice president of the Central of Georgia Railway. He was a member of the Georgia Historical Society. I think he was president.
He was, yeah.
But he bought that home around 1890, lived there until his death in the early 1930s. And then it was a couple of years later that WTOC purchased that home and turned it into a radio station. And this, he was a lawyer, he was a soldier, he was a very regimented man. And then suddenly, all these people are moving into his house.
Yeah.
And there's all this activity in his house that he was not used to. Of course he's going to throw a fit.
Right.
That does not surprise me at all. Now, SCAD, because everything goes back to the Savannah College of Art and Design, purchased that building after WTOC moved out. And since they've moved in, I've talked to several people who work there. They haven't had any interactions with him, but they're also more of a 9-to-5 operation.
That would make sense.
So I think he's much cooler with the SCAD people being there than with the TV and radio people being there.
He's like, I like structure. I want a schedule. I don't want the
Just
constant
non-stop. Yeah.
Absolutely. I had no idea about this. Like, I don't know why. I guess, I'm always still finding things out. I've only lived in Savannah for 6 years, so there's a lot to catch up on. So it's
Yeah, and this mansion is right on Abercorn Street, and it's directly across from Candler Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So,
still has the tower.
It still has the tower. The tower, by the way, responsible for many injuries and a few deaths because it was so accessible. There was a time when people could just climb it, and they did. And and young people climbed the towers, and people who worked on the towers had to go way up there. And so there was at least 2 stories of deaths from falls from the tower, which a lot of people were like, I think that's the ghost of the building. I was like, I don't think so, because the stories you get are very much what you get from homeowner ghosts. Homeowner ghosts, people who are regimented in the living of the house, are oftentimes, you get that sensation of, what are you doing in my place? Why are you crowding through? What are you doing? Why did you change that? What's going on here? So that seemed to be more of the stories that you got from the Colonel, was this sort of push against your presence, versus when somebody tragically dies who isn't involved, they oftentimes are more pleading and more, a hectic energy of, what am I doing here? Why am I here? What's going on? Which you'll find in a lot of places like theaters and stuff, people get drawn in, and their energy is more of a kind of a searching for answers energy, a sensation of, oh, this person just wants to get out,
Yep.
you know, versus a ghost who's like, I want you to get out.
Right.
And WTOC really did change a lot about that building because it went from a private home
Yeah.
to a business.
Right.
And there were porches on the side of it, like you see in a lot of the Victorian homes around here. And they sealed those off, turned them into rooms. The carriage house right next to it, that's where the studio was, the TV studio.
Yeah.
So they did a lot
Yeah.
in that building.
Well, and we talk about this a lot. This was really close to his death. I mean, this was not, so he was still a very remembered and revered person. The more that the public has a consciousness about it, the more likely that spirit has tenacity, has the ability to hold form and hold who they are in a better, because there's a consensus around it. So, you know, you pass and a lot of people know who you are, and they see your house being turned over. They're thinking, oh, that's the old Lawton house. Oh, that's Colonel Lawton's house. That kind of energy, that kind of food for the spirit can really give it manifestation, can really give it a form that it can, you know, a tangible form. And I've heard of sightings, but mostly voices, mostly hearing his voice. And even like in this, because they used to have a bank of sound booths like towards the back, and people will have their headphones on, and they'd say they hear it in the headphones, a man's voice, and they're like, somebody talking, you know?
Wow.
Which makes sense
Yeah.
because everything about TV and radio involves voices.
Voices
Which is very
and-
important.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that in the modern era, we have a lot of great ghost stories that are like telephonic, you know, people getting
Yes.
calls or hearing voices over the phone. And so I think there's a whole world of paranormal research that should be kind of looking at the broadcast electricity and all of that. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and I mean, like, you know, it's easy for a spirit to kind of transmit itself into the stream of communication because they're like, oh, you guys are talking and you're always talking about things. Hi, I'd like to communicate something. You know, I would get it if I was living in a house like that as a spirit and
Sure.
there's, you know.
All of a sudden you had a voice.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's, you know, it makes sense. But it's interesting that they chose a Victorian house to have their news station. That's not the first place I would choose,
Well,
typically.
they were growing. So jumping to WSAV briefly, at least, it also started off as a radio station, and it used to be off of Broughton and Bull, you know, where that red brick building is right next to, I think it's the Truist Bank, Neil.
Yeah.
Oh, yep.
Those are newer buildings. There used to be I think they're called tall buildings.
Yeah.
It's not quite a skyscraper, but it's a tall building. And WSAV originally broadcast out of that old building. So they were just looking for space. Radio is still pretty new. So it really was kind of like, let's get the team together and do something out of somebody's garage.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's something that a lot of people probably aren't familiar with is in the history of telecommunications, finding spaces was about adapting spaces. It wasn't like they were building studios and building things. They were finding places that had, you know, appropriate height and appropriate land for them to put up these antenna. So yeah, you don't think about it, but you know, like old radio stations were oftentimes inside like department buildings, department stores, and things like that because. First, the height was really important. There's not tall buildings in Savannah. We don't do the
We have
skyscrapers.
tall,
We have
quotation
quote
marks.
unquote
Yes.
tall buildings.
2 stories, basically.
But I remember hearing stories of them in old radio looking for buildings that had like, you know, the proper kind of gutter system so they can just like jack onto that to boost their signal. So yeah, you hear a lot of stories about just before the boom of telecommunications, people were like garage bands, but there were, you know,
and
radio
even
stations.
now, I think a lot of people think that TV and radio is way more glamorous than it actually is.
Absolutely.
Like if y'all could see some of the behind the scenes stuff that we had to do, you would be like, how are you on the air? Because it was rough sometimes. It's especially when you're talking about local stations, not like something based out of LA
Right,
or
sure.
New York.
Right.
It is very low budget.
No, I mean, and it makes sense. You know, it's the same way with any, you know, if you're familiar with any type of film production, it's like that, you know, because you look at things and you're like, oh, it's so glamorous and all that. And like, nope, we are all sitting in a small space together and we're trying to do our best. That's how it really is. But onto, I guess, SAV. So you said you had like a experience with a ghost while you were on air.
Yes.
At one point.
So the building that WSAV is in now is their first building as a news station. They started off as radio downtown, and then in the 1950s they built the location off of Victory Drive that they're still in now. And yeah, it's an older building. I started working there in 2010. I worked the overnight shift. I worked midnight to about 8 or 9 in the morning.
Goodness.
And yeah. And when I first started working there, I was the only person there until about 4 a.m. So you hear things. Mm-hmm. You would hear footsteps. You would hear voices in other parts of the building. And being the only person there, you're just like, someone just left a TV on and there's a little bit of volume. That's what I'm hearing. That is what I'm hearing. There were actually a couple of times where I went and walked around the building because it's like, it sounds like someone's here, and I never saw anyone. And doing one of the things that we had to do just to get on the air, they were doing some remodeling. You have a production booth where at the time I was the producer, the director, and we had a graphics operator who would pop up the graphics on screen. And we all sat in this little room, and they were remodeling that. So they moved us upstairs. There's a second story in that building. And they moved us up to this teeny tiny room where you feel like you're operating out of somebody's garage. Oh, and as we were sitting up there, my graphics operator is sitting closest to the door. And during a commercial break, he asked if anyone else was at the station. And we said, no, it's just us and the anchors who you can all see on camera. And he said, I keep hearing footsteps in the lobby. And it sounds like they're coming up the stairs, but he would look towards the door. Nobody was coming up. So I was like, okay, it's not just me. I'm not the only person who hears that. And then over the years, the station expanded. I got a second producer, which thank God, it was 2.5 hours in the morning by myself trying to produce a show. So I got a second producer. We got more staff who were there a little bit longer. And other people would start hearing the footsteps in the lobby. So I was like, okay, it's not just me. And it became an inside joke. Oh, yeah, it's just the station ghost. Oh. We actually had one producer who refused to go to the bathroom by herself because she was terrified of running into the station ghost. And we were like, he hasn't hurt anybody.
Right. It's just
he just walks around.
It just takes once, though.
Yeah, right.
But one day we were on air. It was the 6 a.m. newscast. By that point, they had automated some things, so it was just me and the director sitting in the production booth. And my director is going through the video files to make sure that everything is playing the way that it's supposed to be, because sometimes you get, little glitches in the system. And I am looking at the cameras, because those are also automated now, and sometimes they just decide they're going to pan this way. So I'm making sure everything's where it's supposed to be. And I'm looking at one of the cameras that is pointed towards my anchors, and I see a flash in front of it, like somebody ran in front of it. It was a brown flash. And I have accidentally run in front of live cameras before. I've had plenty of coworkers also do that, especially with the weather camera, because you always forget when that one's live. So sometimes you see someone run in front of it accidentally. So I know what it looks like. And I got on the headset and was talking to my prompter operator who was sitting in the studio. I said, Mike, is anyone else in the studio? And he said, no, it's just me and the anchors. And I knew it couldn't be Mike because his headset is hardwired into a desk, so he can't wander around. And I turned to ask my director if he had seen that, and he is staring straight for it. His eyes are about the size of saucers, and he just nods. And I was like, okay, we both saw that then. Awesome. And so the legend of the station ghost grew from there. We were like, he's a real thing. It's not just footsteps. Right. He ran in front of a camera. And we always automatically assumed that it was a he. Now, later on, after I've left the station, I tried to figure out who the station ghost is. I had researched the history of that property, thinking that maybe it could be tied back to when the Savannah races were a thing.
Absolutely.
I know there were some deadly crashes. So I thought maybe somebody got left behind and decided to haunt the news station, but I couldn't find anything. Now, there's a lot of turnover in the news business, but there was a guy who worked in engineering who I knew had been there for a good long time. So I reached out to him and asked, hey, we always talked about the station ghost in the morning. Do you have any idea who it could be? And he immediately replied back, yep, that's Byron.
Oh, Byron. You didn't know? You didn't know that's Byron?
Byron was an engineer at this station. He worked there since it started as a radio station in the 1940s. And this was his life. He was one of those old timers, like, you get that job and that's your job your entire life. He bought a station a house back behind the station so that if there were any emergencies overnight, he could just walk over. This was his life, and he passed away in 1988, I believe.
Wow.
And my coworker said that is when the footsteps started.
Huh.
Now, we never felt like he was menacing. It just really felt like he was checking on things. As an engineer, you got to make sure everything is running properly. So it just seemed like he was walking around, checking on things, making sure everything was still running smoothly. Interesting thing about him running in front of the camera, though, it was during a commercial break. Our cameras do not record during commercial breaks unless we set them to record. And so when he ran in front of that camera, it didn't record. And as an engineer, he would know that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So as soon as I found that out, I told some of my friends who had also worked with, and I was like, it's Byron. We know who the station ghost is. And everybody was like, of course, it was an engineer.
Right.
Naturally.
Absolutely. Well, it's kind of adorable, though, that it's like, he's like, I love my job so much. I'm going to stay with it for the rest of eternity. It's,
And that story is common of workplace ghosts.
Right.
Workplace ghosts are people who had such a regimented life and dedication. That's the other thing, is the level of dedication that a person has in their life oftentimes, expands past it. You'll hear it all the time, ghosts of people who beloved the office so much that, after death, they still come in. It's like the retiree who just doesn't, doesn't leave the office. My favorite thing is just how nonchalant the answer of, oh yeah, it's Byron.
Yeah.
The immediacy of it is, oh yeah, it's obvious.
Right.
That's awesome. That's a great story.
And while I was there, we also had a ghost interrupt one of our live shots.
Oh. Okay.
So when I first started working there, we didn't have a morning reporter, which seems insane. I don't know why they didn't plan for that, but they did it. But it was Halloween, and I wanted to do something cool and spooky for Halloween, even though we didn't have a reporter. So I told my photographer, hey, take the live truck down to Colonial Park Cemetery. Obviously, we can't get in, it's closed, but you can set up the camera, and we'll get a static shot of the cemetery, and we have something called bump shots, which if you don't know what that is, I will explain. Bump shot is a static shot of something, the river street or, a flag waving, and you use it to go into commercial breaks and sometimes to come out of commercial breaks.
Gotcha.
So he went down there, he set up the shot, we had some spooky music queued up that we were going to play over these bump shots coming in and out of commercial breaks. He had everything set up, everything looked great. And live trucks are always really weird. Now everything it's kind of goes through cell phones, like you dial in now.
Sure.
But back then with the live truck, everything was kind of hardwired and things glitched all the time. And I have seen those live trucks do some weird stuff. But he set up the shot, everything looked great. The second before we went to take the shot, it changed from color to sepia tone. I, in my entire career, have never seen it change to sepia tone. I've seen it change to black and white. I've seen it go all fuzzy. I have never seen it change to sepia tone. And my director started panicking. He was like, oh, we can't take the shot. And I was like, no. The ghosts are sending us a vibe. Go with it.
They're like, this is appropriate.
Yes.
I think it needs
What
a
is
little
this color?
mood coloring.
Yes. Give it a little spice, kind
there it
of.
is. Wow.
And it stayed like that throughout the entire newscast.
Wow.
And my photographer kept going into the live truck, like changing things, trying to get it back into color. It never changed.
Wow. The ghosts were like, nope, we want sepia tone.
Yep.
We
Reminds me of there was a makeover show where people would come in and they would like make over your house, sort of ambush people while they're away. I think it was While You're Out was the name of it. And one of the stories that came out of that, I had a friend who was ambushed and their house was redone while they were out. And when they came back, they were talking about how one of the cameras that they had was set up in a back room, but the feed, when they looked at the monitor, wasn't the room. And they were like, but it's not like transit, it's live wire. It's a wire running from a camera into the monitor. And the more they looked at it, they're more like, no, it is the room. There's just different things in it. And they were like, it looks like a nursery, but my friend had no child. It was not, it was a regular bedroom, but they were like, what's going on? We can't figure it out. And when they tried to look back at the recording, it wasn't recording, but they were positive what they were looking at was a nursery. And like people were like, well, maybe it's a baby nanny cam like across the street, and then when we're picking up the feed, it's like we're not broadcasting here.
Right.
It's like the camera is just showing us something that we can't figure out. And I was like, cameras are tricky beasts.
Yeah, I kind of wish JT was, present for this conversation because I feel like he would have some good insight into how a camera could do that. Because if you didn't realize, JT's a camera nerd, and so he knows how to operate most of those things. But that's really bizarre that a camera would be able to pick up something that maybe was there at one point.
Right.
Like, I just feel like I've never heard that before.
Neither I. And I was like, I would kill for that footage. And they're like, there was no footage. It did not record, but I was like,
But I want to see the ghost nursery. It's where
Ghosts are so tricky. We just want to show you that this exists. We don't want you to have any proof of it.
Right.
Just a story.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, just the story. Go on.
Yeah, just so people can call you crazy and we get the kicks for it. It's like...
Right.
It's so true. And of course it was Colonial Park Cemetery where that would happen.
Absolutely.
Colonial Park Cemetery always has weird stuff going on. Like, I've live streamed in the cemetery and things glitch or, things like that. Or you hear like weird audio things come through. So the cemetery, our cemetery in particular, I want to say, is very active. So
countless people see... Like at night, they lock the gates, and countless people will see figures or people moving around in the cemetery. Which, of course, it's not like the fence isn't only 6 feet tall and you can hop over it. So there is a good chance that you're just seeing like vandals or people who can't take the hint from the locked gates, which is plentiful. I've known many people to like go into the cemetery after hours. But the fact that there are so many stories of, I going past the cemetery and just seeing someone standing in the cemetery or having that experience. Yeah. Colonial Park Cemetery is definitely a hotbed,
Absolutely.
Because it extends past the cemetery that you're looking at, there's a lot of reason for there to be haunting at the Colonial Park Cemetery.
So JT has joined to check on the cameras. So JT, we have a question for you. So Eenie was telling us about how she had a photographer with one of the news stations that was trying to get a bump shot of Colonial Park Cemetery, and right like a second before they went live on broadcast, the cemetery turned to a sepia tone on the camera, but they don't know how that's possible. Come answer. Come give your 2 cents.
And these were news cameras.
And
Yeah.
news cameras.
News cameras.
Yeah, so every camera's sensor is going to have a color science, and I would think that camera censored. You have to black balance or white balance beforehand, and that has to do with the temperature of the sensor. So maybe they didn't black balance their camera correctly, or it's ghost.
Yeah.
Well,
And these were the old cameras where your viewfinder was not in color; it was in black and white, so you had to look for the zebra stripes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
It had peaking and stuff on
Right.
it. Yeah, okay.
And it changed from color to sepia at a moment where nobody was interfering.
There was no interference or anything, because normally you'll get some static in there, or you'll start to see the colors go in and out. This one went from color to sepia tone.
Okay. Yeah, that's weird. Let me think about it. Because, it's like the first thing that comes to mind is the temperature of the sensor.
Yeah.
But like going from color to a sepia, I've never heard of a camera ever doing that. That is just the weirdest.
And these cameras are not designed for effect.
No.
You know, they're not designed to create a look or a mood.
Yeah, I did that.
And it was on Halloween too that this happened. So
Just so you have all the
yes. So it was truly, I think the ghosts were like, this is the appropriate aesthetic. That's what I think it boils down to. Which,
or one put its hand over the
right.
no, thank you.
No, that's
It's
enough of that.
What? Pictures in color? We don't understand that.
No, ew, gross.
Ew.
But it's funny. Enie always brings in these like really cool ghost stories. Like the other day, you posted on TikTok about the. This is off topic of news stations, but you were you posted on TikTok how like you were, I guess, taking a tour over by the old Candler Hospital, and it looked like the ghosts were having a ghost
rave.
party because the lights were flashing at the top of the hospital.
Do you know what that room was at one point?
I don't.
So that if you look at the building, it looks like a little building on top of the building, and that's not exactly where the lights were flickering. It's just, but that was the mental ward at one time.
Oh.
More specifically. If I remember correctly, they used to perform lobotomies. Yeah.
Now, what I did not mention in that video is I had mediums on that tour.
Oh.
And I've been by there the night before and I'd seen the light strobing. That's when I took the video, and then it did that for 2 nights. And so the second night we went by, I thought it'd be fixed. It was still going. And several of the people on my tour said there was a man standing up in that room.
Yeah, that's the story is when they used to cover the windows with those windows up there at the top, they would cover them with like newsprint or just paper. It would always get torn down in like scratches. Like they would see this one panel of the glass. All the other windows were perfectly covered, but there was one. And so the story was that a lot of people would pass was there's a man who can't stand not being able to look out over, Forsyth Park. Yeah.
And so he had a ghost party.
And so he had a ghost party.
Maybe it was his birthday.
Well, I don't know if you ever walked by the mansion on Forsyth Park when the light in the very top steeple of the Fox and Weeks Park would be on. There's like it looks like a castle, parapet, but there's sometimes a light on there. What a lot of people don't know is there's no access to that room. Like when I worked security there, the light was on. I was like, how? And we go up, and there's no access to the room. Like, it's completely sealed off by ducts and everything. And so it's like, oh, I don't know how that light comes on. But sometimes it's on and sometimes it's off. And it's like, maybe it's attached to some other switch, but you would think it would be on more if it was attached to some other switch. It's just randomly on every now and then.
It's so creepy. But that's why we wanted to bring Enie back on, though, because we felt like, one, because, we love having her on the show, but it's like she always has these very interesting, very unique paranormal
wonderful
experiences.
Morsels of Savannah's paranormal. Absolutely.
Right. When I feel like it's because you're out there, like doing walking tours all the time. So it's like, that you're more, I guess, what's the word I'm thinking of?
In tune?
Yes, not in tune necessarily, but like you're more susceptible is what I'm thinking of, because you're just constantly around. So it's like, they're like, oh, Enie's here, let's put on a show. What would be like one of the more, I guess, like frightening or notable ghost experiences you've had doing tours and stuff?
So I don't really get scared by the ghosts. Unnerved, just because it's never expected. But I wouldn't say scared, just because working in news overnight, stuff happens. I have dealt with bomb threats. I have dealt with people calling in to physically threaten me and my coworkers. We had one guy at 3 a.m., because it's always at 3 a.m., actually tried to break into the station, and my co-producer and I had to lock ourselves in the bathroom. One of us is on the phone with 911. Another one is calling all of our coworkers being like, do not come in. Stay in your car. Don't come to the station. So after that, ghosts don't seem that scary.
Right.
But yeah,
That's
people are
very
always
fair.
going to be a lot scarier
Than
when
the
it comes
dead.
down to
Yes.
it.
Oh, yeah.
And especially being in the public eye. Because
Right.
when you're in the public eye, you get people who are unnaturally, attached to the people they see on the screen or the information coming out of the TV. Yeah.
But recently I just started my own Patreon. And for my patrons, I decided I was going to go down to River Street on Thanksgiving night because it was nice and quiet. I hate going down there, even though I get a lot of requests for it because it's so busy.
Yeah.
I
And-
feel you.
Yes.
I hate it too.
So I was like, Thanksgiving night, no one's going to be down there. It's going to be great. So I went down there to do a special live for my patrons, and I brought my dog, Vash. Now, Vash has alerted me to things down there before. We were close to the Waving Girl statue one night when I was doing a TikTok live, and he tried to play with what I think was a dog. There were no dogs down there. And we were on a side of the statue where he couldn't see the statue because the statue does have a dog on it. But we weren't close enough for him to see that dog, so I know he wasn't seeing the dog statue and thinking it was a living dog. He tried to play with something down there.
That's so cute.
Right?
That's so cute.
So I was like, if there's anything else down there, he'll alert to it. And we walked around in like the Factors Row area where normally you pick up on stuff, but it was very quiet that night. Like, it was like all the ghosts decided it's a holiday. We're going
Right.
to take a break too. So I did my little live. I went around to some places and we're back on River Street. We're about to turn to go up the staircase next to City Hall. And Vash stops and turns and looks back behind us like someone's there. And there were people on the sidewalk, but they were a good distance away from us. And I turned to look back there and I said, because I talked to my dog like he's human, I was like, baby, I don't see anybody back there. But he kept stopping to look back and he even tried to turn around and walk back. And I have never seen him do that. And I was like, okay, don't know who that is, but we've got to go. And I very quickly walked away from that situation. It wasn't scary. It was just weird.
Right.
And of course, it happened on River Street.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Well, and I mean, that's not to say there isn't a ghost dog on River Street. There are so many spirits down on River Street. It's kind of hard to decipher them, but there's more ghost dogs than you think, y'all. Like,
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
And I think we talked about this before, is like, you may have seen ghosts in your lifetime and not registered or realized, that dog on the side of the road or that,
Right.
that cat that's running around your house might not actually be there. It might just be some spiritual imprint of an animal, and animals do show up often. My own dog, Ranger, who had an experience. Do you remember where my wife Megan had a studio on River Street?
Yeah.
Right under there, we brought Ranger down, and we were walking right under there, and Ranger was a strange pup. He's a very, like, if he was outside, he was crazy, but when he was inside, he was very calm. But he responded to commands. So, like, if he said sit, he would sit. But the way he sat when you tell him to sit was always very, like, he'd get very upright and he'd sit in almost like a very fast motion. He was like looking at something, and it was like, okay, and I'm pulling on him, and he's not responding to any pulling. And finally he like sits like and looking up, and I was like, what are you seeing? It was as if somebody told him to sit, and he responded. But he passed away last Thanksgiving, and I still to this day like see out of the corner of my eye him running around a corner, and it's just like, oh. And it's never like scary or anything. It's like very familiar. It's like, oh.
Right.
And it's like, is it my mind playing tricks on me, or is Ranger still running around the house?
So that reminds me of another like quasi news story. My first station was actually in Panama City, Florida. And one of my reporter friends had invited me over to her apartment. It was right before Christmas. We were going to make Christmas cookies for our shift. So I'd never been to her apartment before. She lived out on Panama City Beach in this, high-rise looking building. And I get there, never been there before. But as soon as I stepped in, you step into a hallway, the bathroom's right in front of you. To your left is the living room and kitchen. To your right is her bedroom. And she had all the doors open. So I step in, I look to my right, and I see like the back end of a gray fluffy cat dart into her room. So I thought, oh, she has a cat. That's cool. We continued on baking, and we had everything in the oven. We were waiting. And so she gave me a tour of the house, and I noticed that I didn't see any food or water bowls, no litter boxes, and I hadn't seen her cat since I walked in. So I asked her, hey, where's your cat? And she said, I don't have a cat. And I said, okay. This is not an area where cats could just dart in. She lived on an upper floor. Had she lived on ground floor, like, sure, there's stray cats all over the place. But she also showed me around her entire apartment, and I did not see that cat again the entire time we were there. So, yeah. Ghost animals happen.
Absolutely. If you didn't tune into the live that I just did, I told the live stream about my latest ghost of the day, if you will, a more notable variety, was a ghost dog. A couple days ago, I was letting the dogs out in our backyard, and my little silky terrier, Argyle, she knows where her tennis ball is because she's insane, and she's only allowed to have tennis balls outside because she acts like a crackhead if she has them inside. And so she always does this thing where she'll go sit next to the planting table where we keep the tennis ball. And so I let him out, and I see out of the corner of my eye this little blonde scruffy thing. And so, but it wasn't wearing a harness like Argyle usually is. And I looked down, I'm like, did I take her harness off or something? I looked down, and it's just about the same height as Argyle, but it's a totally different dog. And I'm just like, hello. And then it just vanished. And I'm just like, okay, ghost dog. But I'm like, that's really cute though. I'm like, thank you for coming to visit. But I feel like I don't know, maybe my dogs attracted the ghost dog or something like that. Also, I had mentioned that we had found that bone in our backyard recently. Yeah. And I showed it to my cousin who is about to become a doctor and whatnot. And I showed it to him, the photo, and I was like, what do you think it is? He's like, it looks like a piece of a leg bone, but I can't tell from the photo. Just, I'd have to see it in person if it's human or an animal. So, you know, it's about as common to bury your loved one in your courtyard as an animal.
Yeah, sure.
In Savannah. So it's a 50-50 shot of whether or not. But I was like, maybe it was like the bone of this dog or something. And he's like, oh, you found my bone. And so he's like, hi.
Throw it.
Right. Throw my leg bone. Ew, that's awful. But yeah, so I was like, oh, well, maybe it's that dog or something. And that's why he showed up. But my dog's completely ignored the animal. So maybe Tartan's not in tune to things like that. Argyle, on the other hand, very in tune, and I'm very surprised she didn't acknowledge it because she is so commonly like barking at ghosts and things like that because she's defensive. So
do I need to bring Vash over and see if he'll
honestly that would be cute. That would be so sweet.
A doggy ghost date. A ghost doggy date.
Yeah. And it was I feel like more and more people have told me about their experiences with ghost animals. Like they're like, oh, I saw a ghost cat at the pirate's house, or I saw a ghost whatever.
There are a couple of famous ghost animals. I know on Jones Street there's a ghost cat that is pretty popular between Abercorn and Drayton, and I know that is it House? One of the dorms has a ghost cat in it as well, but I can't remember which.
I wouldn't be surprised. We have so many cats in Savannah. I'm not shocked that there would be multiple ghost cats because sometimes it's hard to decipher if I'm like, do we really have that many cats, or are some of them ghost cats? And cats naturally walk between the Vale and, like our realm and stuff. So they're the most likely to become spirits because they already have one peat in. So, it's...
Well, there was... And as total fiction, but, there's a lot of people who write about cats and their ability to go through the Vale.
Right.
But one story I'd read was that when a cat goes to sleep, it's actually a ghost cat somewhere else in the world, in our world.
Interesting.
And so,
I love that theory.
yeah, and I was like, that's kind of cute. That's
right.
It explains why they're always asleep.
Right. I mean, I learned when I first started looking into witchcraft and stuff, one of the things was it's like if you have a problem with a spirit or you have a message you want to get to the other side, talk to your cat and like tell your cat what you want to say and they'll deliver the message for you, which I'm sure for those of you who don't believe in those types of thought processes or belief systems are like, you're absolutely insane. But I'm serious. Talk to your cat if you've got a problem with a ghost.
Yeah, a lot of the measures are peculiar because the one that I had always heard was you write the message on a piece of paper and then set the paper on fire, because when the words burn, they're actually leaving this plane and they have to travel through the next plane, and the spirits can read whatever you write them. So, write a little letter, set it on fire, and it becomes a spiritual letter. It's
true.
Ghost mail, literally.
Yeah, literally ghost mail. I mean, or watch the movie Constantine. Because if you don't believe me, they even do it somewhat to a degree in the movie Constantine, where he, is trying to cross over to that other realm. I won't spoil anything, but he takes the cat with him for a reason.
Yeah.
Just saying. So
it's important.
The cat does not get hurt.
No, the cat does
Save
not
the
get
cat.
Right. Quite literally save the cat. Yeah, I don't know how we fell into the animal realm, but I feel like that happens with Enie anyways, because she's such an animal lover. But, I think like the last time you were on, we posted a TikTok about your dog having an experience. And so
It was my foster dog.
yes.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like we just always end up talking about animals with
Who
experiences.
doesn't like to talk about animals?
I know.
Right.
Animals and ghosts? Come on.
And they are some of the, especially dogs, they are so heightenedly aware of their surroundings and they have so many experiences.
Yeah, cats might be aware, but they just don't care.
No.
Right.
They're not going to, unless it's really, really disturbing. They'll pay about
you're
the
a
same
ghost?
amount. Yeah, it's like,
Whatever.
Absolutely.
You think that makes you special?
It's funny. My grandmother, she would do this thing for her birthday when I was growing up. If my dad forgot to like make a post or something about her, because obviously she's passed on. So, and she was a Leo. She was a very strong personality and whatnot. So if you forgot to like talk to her or like say happy birthday or whatever, she would for a week torment my dog at home. She would just make his life miserable until my dad realized, he's like, oh my gosh, her birthday passed. Like I need to acknowledge that. And then it would stop. He'd be like, I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry. So, but they do things like that. I feel like, or that's her MO,
Sure.
It's like, you need to acknowledge my birthday because I'm a Leo and I, am the way I am. So, but yeah, dogs, I've had the most experience with having, seeing ghosts and, reacting to ghosts. But
So you mentioned Oglethorpe House.
Yes.
I have a story that involves WJCL, the ABC affiliate,
Sure.
with O House. So WJCL started in 1970. It did not start as a radio station. It started as a news station, broadcast news station. And it was started by J.C. Lewis,
JCL.
who a lot of people recognize him because of his family's Ford dealership, which is, I think, the oldest continuously operated Ford dealership in the state of Georgia.
I believe that is true.
It was actually started, his father bought it. So J.C. Lewis Ford is named after his father, not him. He's junior. But everybody thinks of him because he ran it forever. He was also a one-term mayor of Savannah, and he really pushed hard to get the Civic Center built. And aside from being a mayor and owning a car dealership, he was a businessman, owned a lot of different things. He was behind a lot of different land development deals, and he also started WJCL, JCL, J.C. Lewis. It's named after him.
right.
But I've talked to a lot of my friends who used to work at the original location of WJCL, which was off of Television Circle, which is Southside-ish.
Way south side.
Yeah.
Right next to the JCL dealership.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're not there anymore. They've also moved out to Chatham Parkway. But considering that building was older, I've asked plenty of people who worked there, was it haunted? And one of my friends said that he heard that somebody died in the building having a heart attack, but as far as he knows, that person doesn't haunt the building. One person said that they had heard offhanded that J.C. Lewis haunts it, but again, that was one person who said it, never heard anything else. So as far as I know, that building is not haunted. But J.C. Lewis is the one who built the Downtowner Motor Inn next to
Right.
the Civic Center,
Right.
which is now Oglethorpe House. So even though he probably doesn't haunt the old JCL, he is responsible for a lot of hauntings.
Oh, yeah,
in Savannah.
absolutely.
Right. Absolutely. Well, yeah. And if you don't know about like all the hauntings of Oglethorpe House, go listen to our SCAD episode, because we talk all about all of we only scrape the surface of SCAD's ghosts.
So many stories at that place.
Right. But yeah, definitely go listen to that so you can get a better understanding of what's going on with that particular building. I'd never heard, though, that he was the one who was in that building. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Because there's a lot of theories of like who is what in that building. I mean, but the biggest hauntings are like, you know, the motherly figure that cleans things up, and then you've got the serial killer, and you got the little girl and all that. So
The kind of things that you find in transient.
right.
You know, all hotels inherently have some kind of, you know, strange attraction to spirits, because sometimes it's not even a specific ghost. It is the type of ghost, you know, archetype ghosts. And hotels are inherently creepy.
Absolutely.
Because it's where people have, you know, bite-sized portions of life. You know, they live there for only a very short period of time, and so there's a lot of parasitic energy to a
there's
hotel.
Also a lot of bad stuff.
Most bad things that happen in hotels. We could do a whole episode on the Alamo.
Oh, God.
Yeah,
Right.
because
Or the other Thunderbird.
Oh, the other Thunderbird.
Oh,
Yeah,
gosh, yeah.
And so, that might need to be an episode all of its own, is the fact that hotels, motels, it's where people go to do unsavory things in a lot of cases, where people wreck their entire lives. They may not die there, but their death starts there. You know, lots of terrible things occur in hotels because they don't want to do it in their home, and they don't want to do these things, you know, out in the open. And so those outskirt hotels and motels and especially the motor lodges, where the doors are facing the parking lot. You know, those are people who are looking for a fast and easy way. It's not all just travelers.
Right. Absolutely. So that'll be another episode we'll get to.
Put it on the list.
Put it on the list, definitely. But we are going to have to wrap things up. But thank you so much, Eenie, for coming and joining. Yes. And I'm sure we'll have you back for season 3. But and
yes,
if you,
please.
Yes, absolutely. And we are going to have a exclusive episode with Eenie on Patreon. So if you want to see that, you have to join Patreon. Join us on the Parajunkie side. But
Join us.
ooh, yes.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, yes. But yeah, so we definitely are going to have her back for season 3. And just a reminder that we are going to be taking a break, a very short break, but just enough time for the holidays so that we can enjoy our families and, you know, catch up with things and also reformat a little bit. So we will be back on New Year's Day, or I should say. Yeah, New Year's Day, correct, Jay? That rhymed, but yeah. So we will be back then. But during that time, we have a large catalog for you to listen to. So if you
Go back to Enie's first appearance.
absolutely, literally episode 1, and you can kind of see our best hits. You've got
There you
Mark
go.
McCullough, you've
Right.
got Eenie, you've got Aubrey, you've got all the good people that have come on the show. So there's that. Also, if you don't already follow us on social media, you can find us under everything as Haunted City Podcast. And then also make sure to check out our blog posts that we've been posting about spooky things in Savannah at hauntedcitypodcast.com. But with that, thank you guys so much for listening. This has been a great season. And my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And stay spooky, y'all.